Emma's breathing faltered in her chest as the little girl desperately scribbled in her drawing notebook. Tears of frustration rolled down her golden freckles. The 5-year-old with red curls framing her angelic face tapped her pencil on the paper, trying to get attention. On the other side of the glass wall, Matthew Taylor gestured nervously on the phone, his deep voice reverberating as he tried to save a $1 million contract. While secretaries hurried through the office on Fifth Avenue, no one stopped to understand the little girl. The child, trapped in her silent world since birth, was a mystery in that luxurious office. That's when Sarah Johnson entered the room with her cleaning supplies. Her blue eyes captured the scene. The distressed girl, while the adults continued with their busy lives. Have you ever been in a situation where it seemed like no one in the world could understand your suffering? What would it be like to grow up in a world where few understand your language? Sarah hesitated for a moment. It wasn't her place to interfere. After all, she was just the company's janitor, hired 6 months ago and rarely crossing paths with the owner, the famous Matthew Taylor. Everyone knew his story, the millionaire businessman who lost his wife in a tragic plane accident 2 years ago and since then had become a cold and distant figure, immersed in work and caring for his deaf daughter. But there was something in Emma's desperate expression that touched Sarah deeply. With a determined sigh, she placed her cleaning supplies on the floor and approached the girl. "Hi," Sarah signed with her hands, using American Sign Language. Emma's green eyes, identical to her father's, widened in surprise. For a moment, she just stared at Sarah, incredulous that someone there could actually communicate with her. Then, her small hands began to move quickly. "I want water. I'm thirsty, but nobody understands." Emma signed, her expression transforming from frustration to relief. Sarah smiled gently. "I'll get it for you," she responded with her hands. "My name is Sarah. What's yours?" "Emma," signed the girl, a smile lighting up her face for the first time. "You understand my language. Everyone here only talks with their mouth." It was at that exact moment that Matthew Taylor returned to the room. His phone call finally concluded. He stopped abruptly at the door, observing the scene before him with astonishment. His daughter, normally withdrawn, animatedly, conversing with her hands alongside the janitor. The expression of happiness on Emma's face was something he hadn't seen in a long time. "What's happening here?" asked Matthew, his authoritative voice echoing through the room. Sarah quickly stood up, her cheeks flushing. "I'm sorry, sir, your daughter seemed to need help." Matthew approached, studying Sarah with a penetrating gaze. "You know ASL?" The incredulity in his voice was palpable. "Yes," Sarah replied, maintaining her composure. "I grew up with a deaf cousin and later studied special education in college before needing to work in other jobs." Emma persistently tugged at the sleeve of her father's expensive blazer and began to sign rapidly. "She understands what I say, Daddy. She knows how to talk to me. I was thirsty and nobody knew." Matthew observed his daughter's moving hands and then turned his gaze to Sarah, an indescribable expression taking over his face. For the first time in months, the powerful businessman seemed vulnerable. Would you translate what she's saying?" he asked, his voice losing its authoritative tone. Sarah nodded and gently translated Emma's words. With each interpreted phrase, Matthew seemed more astonished. When Emma finished expressing how happy she was to finally be able to communicate with someone besides her father, an uncomfortable silence hung in the room. "Mr. Taylor, I'll get water for her. With your permission," Sarah finally said. Matthew agreed, with a brief nod. As Sarah left, he knelt beside his daughter and awkwardly signed, "Do you like her?" Emma's radiant smile was answer enough. When Sarah returned with the water, she found father and daughter trying to communicate in ASL. She discreetly observed how Matthew struggled to understand his daughter's quick signs. "Thank you," Emma signed to Sarah, drinking the water eagerly. "If you don't mind," said Matthew, rising and adjusting his impeccable suit. I'd like to speak with you. Privately, Miss Johnson, Sarah Johnson, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Sarah, he repeated as if testing the name. In my office, please. With a last smile for Emma, Sarah followed Matthew to the adjacent room, her heart racing. The office was spacious and elegant, with a panoramic view of Central Park. How long have you been working here, Sarah? Asked Matthew, sitting behind his imposing mahogany desk. 6 months, sir. And how is it that I never knew you have this skill with ASL? Sarah took a deep breath. The opportunity to mention it never arose, sir. I work mainly during the night shift, when the office is empty. Matthew was silent for a moment, observing her attentively, as if seeing her for the first time. Sarah felt uncomfortable under that penetrating gaze. Despite her natural beauty, she always dressed simply, with her company cleaning uniform and blonde hair tied in a discreet bun. My daughter smiled today, Matthew finally said. For the first time in months, she really smiled. Emma is a lovely girl, Sarah replied sincerely. Lovely, perhaps, but she lives isolated in her silent world. Matthew got up and walked to the window, observing the city. Since my wife died, I've been doing my best to learn ASL, but it's difficult. Emma needs more than I can offer. He turned abruptly. I have a proposal for you, Sarah. I'd like you to work as Emma's companion in the afternoons after school. The salary would be 5 times what you currently receive. Sarah's eyes widened, stunned by the sudden offer. Mr. Taylor, I don't know if it would be appropriate. I'm just the company janitor, and apparently the only person besides me who can adequately communicate with my daughter, he retorted, his voice recovering its authoritative tone. I'm not asking, I'm offering an opportunity, for you and for Emma. The internal conflict was visible on Sarah's face. On one hand, the money would solve many of her financial problems. On the other, crossing the barriers between employee and employer seemed risky. I need to think about it, she finally said. Matthew nodded stiffly. You have until tomorrow. When Sarah left the office, her hands were trembling slightly. Through the glass door, she saw Emma watching her with those large green eyes, full of hope. In that instant, something profound touched her heart, and Sarah knew that her life was about to completely change. 2 days later, Sarah found herself before the imposing gates of the Taylor Mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, one of the most prestigious areas in the region. The elegant construction, surrounded by a meticulously maintained garden, intimidated with its grandeur. Sarah nervously adjusted the bag on her shoulder, questioning her decision to accept the proposal. After a night of insomnia and reflection, she had agreed to work as Emma's companion, motivated both by financial necessity and an inexplicable connection she had felt with the girl. Now, standing before that house that seemed to have come out of a decorating magazine, the doubts returned with full force. The intercom rang 3 times before a formal voice answered. Minutes later, Sarah was led by a uniformed maid along a path of polished stones to the main entrance. The house inside was even more impressive. Double-height ceilings, valuable artwork, and furniture that looked like it had never been used. It was a beautiful house, but strangely devoid of warmth. Miss Johnson! Matthew's deep voice surprised her. He descended the central staircase, wearing casual clothes that, despite being simple, clearly cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. Punctual. I appreciate that. Good afternoon, Mr. Taylor, Sarah replied, trying to sound professional despite her nervousness. Emma is in her room. She's been anxious since she found out you were coming. There was a softness in Matthew's voice that contrasted with his usually rigid posture. I'll show you the house. The tour of the mansion was brief and formal. Matthew explained the basic rules, schedules, and particularities of Emma's routine. Sarah listened attentively but couldn't help noticing how the environment, despite being luxurious, seemed devoid of life. Finally, they arrived at a door decorated with colourful drawings, the only truly childlike element Sarah had seen until then. This is Emma's room, said Matthew, knocking softly on the door before opening it. Emma's room was an explosion of colours and textures. Walls painted with vibrant landscapes, playful furniture, and an impressive amount of illustrated books and artistic materials. It was as if all the life and joy of the house were concentrated in that single room. Emma was sitting on a fluffy rug in the centre of the room, surrounded by drawings. When she saw Sarah, her eyes lit up, and she jumped up, running to hug the newcomer. "You really came," Emma signed animatedly. "Daddy said you would come play with me." "Every day," Sarah smiled, kneeling to be at the girl's height. "Yes, I'm here to spend the afternoons together," she responded in ASL. Emma turned to her father and signed rapidly. "See, Daddy? She understands everything I say." Matthew observed the interaction with a complex expression, a mixture of relief, admiration, and something that seemed almost like sadness. "I'll leave you alone to get to know each other better. I'll be in the office if you need anything." After he left, Emma immediately took Sarah by the hand and led her around the room, proudly showing her toys, books, and especially her drawings. The girl was incredibly talented for her age, creating images full of details and emotion. "You draw very well," Sarah complimented. "I draw what I can't say," Emma replied with surprising wisdom for her 5 years. "Almost nobody understands my hands, so I draw to show what I think." That simple phrase squeezed Sarah's heart. She could imagine the little girl's loneliness, trapped in a world where few people understood her language. "Now you have me to understand your hands," Sarah signed with a gentle smile. "And we can draw together too." The afternoon passed quickly. Sarah discovered that Emma was not only talented, but extremely intelligent and observant. The girl absorbed information like a sponge and demonstrated an understanding of the world around her that seemed well beyond her years. When the clock struck 6, Matthew reappeared at the door. He seemed surprised to find the room transformed into a small studio, with drawings scattered across the floor and Emma animatedly conversing with Sarah. "Looks like you two had fun," he commented, a slight smile softening his usually serious face. "Daddy!" Emma signed enthusiastically. "Sarah knows incredible stories and taught me new signs, and we're going to do a special project tomorrow." Matthew looked at Sarah, an eyebrow raised in question. "I promised to teach her some basic art concepts," Sarah explained, simultaneously translating for Emma. "Colors, textures, perspective, things that can help her express herself even better through drawings." "You understand art?" asked Matthew, seeming genuinely curious. "A little," Sarah replied modestly. "It was part of the special education curriculum. Art is a powerful form of expression, especially for children who face barriers in traditional communication." Emma pulled at the sleeve of her father's shirt, signing rapidly. "Can I show Sarah the backyard tomorrow, please?" Matthew hesitatingly translated his daughter's signs for Sarah, who noticed how he still struggled with some of the more complex movements. "Of course you can," he answered his daughter before turning to Sarah. "Emma rarely shows so much enthusiasm for someone. You seem to have a special gift with her." "It's not a gift, Mr. Taylor. It's just respect for how she communicates," Sarah replied simply. Something in Matthew's gaze changed, as if he were seeing Sarah in a new light. "You said you were studying special education. Why didn't you finish?" he asked abruptly. Sarah felt her face heat up. "Financial problems," she answered succinctly. "My mother got sick. The costs of medications and treatments were high. I had to abandon my studies in the final year to work and help at home." Matthew nodded, his face unreadable. "I understand." An uncomfortable silence fell between them, broken only when Emma asked to show Sarah one more drawing. "I think it's time for me to go," Sarah finally said, noticing the sky darkening through the window. "My driver can take you," offered Matthew. "It's not necessary," Sarah replied quickly. "I live near the train station. I can take the Metro North. I insist, said Matthew, in a tone that didn't admit arguments. It's getting late. Sarah realized it would be futile to argue. She said goodbye to Emma, promising to return the next day, and followed Matthew to the front door. You made my daughter happier in one afternoon than I managed in months, he said when they reached the entrance hall. There was a vulnerability in his voice that caught Sarah by surprise. Thank you for that. Emma is a wonderful child, Sarah replied sincerely. It's a pleasure to spend time with her. For a brief moment, Matthew's gaze softened, and Sarah glimpsed the man behind the facade of the relentless businessman, a father who deeply loved his daughter and carried the weight of a devastating loss. Until tomorrow, Mr. Taylor, she said softly. Matthew, he replied. You can call me Matthew. In the luxurious car that took her home, Sarah reflected on the surreal day she had had. From anonymous janitor to private teacher of the daughter of one of the richest men in New York, life certainly had its unexpected paths. Have you ever had that feeling that you were in the right place, at the right time, as if fate had planned everything? What would you do if you found an opportunity that completely changed the course of your life? The following weeks brought a subtle but profound transformation to the Taylor mansion. What began as a professional arrangement between Sarah and the family gradually evolved into something more significant, as the young teacher's presence brought colors to a home that had long been immersed in shades of grey. One particularly sunny afternoon, Sarah decided to transform the improvised art studio in Emma's room into something more authentic. With Matthew's permission, she brought special paints, brushes of different sizes, and blank canvases. Emma's face lit up with pure joy when she saw the materials. Are we going to paint for real? Like real artists? The girl signed enthusiastically. Exactly like real artists, Sarah confirmed. And today we're going to learn something special, how to express feelings through colors. Emma absorbed every word and movement of Sarah's hands as if they were precious treasures. When they finally began to paint, the little girl immersed herself in the activity with surprising concentration for her age. This is how Matthew found them when he arrived home earlier than usual. Both sitting on the floor, covered by a protective tarp, their faces speckled with colourful paint, laughing as they created vibrant patterns on their canvases. What's going on here? He asked, standing at the door. Sarah quickly stood up, embarrassed, but Emma ran to her father, proudly displaying her colourful hands before. Rapidly signing, We're painting our feelings. Look, Daddy. This blue colour is how I feel when I'm calm, and this red is joy, and this bright yellow. Matthew observed, fascinated, as his daughter enthusiastically explained each colour and stroke. His eyes met Sarah's over the girl's head, and there was gratitude in them. You don't mind this mess? Sarah asked hesitantly. To her surprise, Matthew smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his normally severe face. This is the first time I've seen my daughter truly excited about something since Jennifer. He stopped, the mention of his late wife's name still clearly painful. You should try it too, Sarah suggested impulsively. What? Asked Matthew, confused. Painting. Expressing your feelings through colours, she explained. Emma would love it, wouldn't she? The girl nodded vigorously, pulling her father by the hand. I don't know how to paint, protested Matthew, but he was already being led to the centre of the room by his determined daughter. Nobody knows at the beginning, Sarah replied with a smile. That's what makes the experience special. Reluctantly, Matthew removed his expensive jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his dress shirt. With patient instructions from Sarah and Emma, he made his first awkward attempts with the brushes. This is therapeutic, he admitted after a few minutes, the usual tension in his shoulders visibly diminishing. Art has always been a form of healing, Sarah commented softly, especially for those who carry pains they can't express with words. Matthew looked up, meeting Sarah's eyes. For a moment it seemed he wanted to say something profound, but then Emma accidentally splashed blue paint, staining her father's face, and the moment was broken by laughter. As days turned into weeks, the routine in the Taylor mansion subtly changed. Afternoons with Sarah were no longer limited to Emma's room. Now they explored the lush garden, the immense library, and even the kitchen, where Sarah taught the girls simple recipes that could be prepared without needing to hear verbal instructions. One day, as they were preparing chocolate cookies, Patricia Taylor, Matthew's mother, arrived without warning. The elegant 60-year-old woman with impeccably dyed hair and aristocratic posture stood at the kitchen door, shock evident on her face at seeing her granddaughter, her son, and the young woman she knew only as the new teacher, covered in flour and laughing. "Matthew, what does this mean?" she asked, her icy tone cutting through the warm atmosphere like a knife. "Grandma!" Emma signed excitedly, running to hug her grandmother, leaving cookie dough marks on the expensive silk ensemble. Patricia moved away slightly, taking a handkerchief to clean the stains. "Emma, dear, ladies don't get dirty like this in the kitchen. That's what servants are for." Matthew quickly intervened. "Mother, this is Sarah Johnson, Emma's companion whom I mentioned." Patricia examined Sarah from head to toe with a calculated look. "Ah, yes, the janitor who now plays at being a teacher." Sarah felt her face burn but maintained her composure, extending a hand in greeting. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Taylor." Patricia ignored the gesture. "Matthew, we need to talk privately." The tense climate accompanied the rest of the afternoon. Sarah tried to keep Emma entertained while she heard fragments of the heated discussion in Matthew's office. Words like inappropriate, social position, and what people will think reached the kitchen. When Patricia finally left, Matthew returned to the kitchen looking exhausted. "I apologize for my mother's behavior," he said stiffly. "It's not necessary," Sarah replied, as she cleaned the last vestiges of the cooking session. "I understand her concerns." "No, you don't understand," Matthew retorted. "My mother lives in a world where appearances matter more than happiness. She never understood my choices. Not even my marriage to Jennifer was approved by her." It was the first time Matthew mentioned his late wife so directly, and Sarah realized how much this represented in terms of trust. "Jennifer didn't come from a traditional family?" she asked carefully. Matthew smiled sadly. "On the contrary, Jennifer was the daughter of a diplomat, studied at the best schools in Europe. The problem was her free spirit, her refusal to conform to high society expectations. She preferred to volunteer teaching art in underprivileged communities than to attend charity dinners just to appear in the newspapers." Sarah smiled, imagining what kind of extraordinary woman Jennifer must have been. "Does Emma take after her?" "In many ways," Matthew replied, looking fondly at his daughter who was finishing decorating a cookie. "But Jennifer didn't have the chance to see Emma grow up, to teach her the things she knew." The vulnerability in his voice touched Sarah deeply. Impulsively, she placed a hand over his. "She would be proud to see how you're raising Emma, I'm sure." For a moment, they stayed like this, connected by that simple but meaningful touch. It was Emma who broke the moment, approaching with a specially decorated cookie for her father. Fall was arriving in New York, painting Central Park with golden and reddish tones. It was a sunny Saturday, perfect for the carefully planned outing Sarah had arranged, taking Emma to the interactive exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art, specially adapted for visitors with hearing impairments. To Sarah's surprise, Matthew decided to accompany them, cancelling an important business meeting. In the last 2 months, she had noticed significant changes in the businessman. He smiled more frequently, dedicated more time to his daughter, and most importantly, was genuinely making an effort to improve his knowledge of ASL. The museum was full of visitors that morning. The exhibition, titled Feel to See, offered sensory experiences that transcended hearing, vibrations synchronized with visual projections, tactile works that could be touched, and installations that worked with aromas and textures. Emma was amazed. Her green eyes sparkled as she absorbed every detail, every color, every new sensation. Sarah translated the information into ASL, while Matthew observed the interaction between the two, fascinated by the fluidity of the communication. "She's learning so much from you," he commented quietly, as Emma explored an interactive sculpture. Not just ASL or art, but living without fear. Sarah smiled, moved by the comment. Emma already had all of this inside her. She just needed an opportunity to express it. It was at this moment that a familiar voice interrupted the conversation. "Sarah? Sarah Johnson, is that really you?" A tall, well-dressed man approached, his face lighting up in recognition. "Michael Wilson!" exclaimed Sarah, genuinely surprised. "How long has it been?" Michael smiled broadly, embracing Sarah with familiarity. "Years, since the days of the ASL extension course at NYU. What have you been doing? Are you still teaching?" Matthew observed the interaction with an unreadable expression, as Sarah introduced Michael as a former study colleague, and as quickly became clear, a renowned American sign language professor who worked with deaf children. "Michael was my mentor when I began to study ASL more deeply," Sarah explained. "He's brilliant." "She exaggerates," Michael replied modestly, before noticing Emma, who was observing the conversation with curiosity. To Matthew's surprise, Michael immediately crouched to the girl's height and began to sign with impressive fluency. "Hello, my name is Michael. What's yours?" he signed. Emma smiled shyly, responding with her graceful hand movements. "Is Emma your daughter?" Michael asked Sarah. Before she could answer, Matthew stepped forward. "Emma is my daughter. Sarah is her teacher and companion." Something in Matthew's possessive tone made Sarah look at him with surprise. "Ah, I understand," Michael replied, extending his hand. "Michael Wilson. Pleasure to meet you." "Matthew Taylor," Matthew replied dryly, shaking the offered hand with more force than necessary. An uncomfortable moment followed, broken only when Emma pulled Sarah's hand, eager to show her another installation in the museum. "It was great to see you, Michael," Sarah said quickly. "Can we talk later? Emma is very excited about the exhibition." Of course," Michael replied, taking a card from his pocket. "This is my contact. It would be great to catch up. I'm coordinating a new project at the Cultural Institute for Deaf Children, something that might interest your student." As they continued their tour through the museum, Sarah noticed that Matthew seemed distant, responding only with monosyllables when she tried to start a conversation. Only when Emma moved away to explore an interactive installation under a monitor's supervision did he finally speak. "You and this Michael have history?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "What? No, of course not. Michael was my professor, a mentor. He's been married for years to Paul, an architect." The tension in Matthew's shoulders visibly decreased, and Sarah had to contain a smile. Could it be possible that the powerful businessman was jealous? The rest of the outing proceeded smoothly. Emma was exhausted but radiant when they returned to the mansion at the end of the afternoon. After helping her with her bath and putting her to bed, Sarah was preparing to leave when Matthew called her to his office. The room, which had once seemed intimidating, was now almost familiar to Sarah. In recent weeks, she and Matthew had spent several evenings there, talking about Emma and planning activities that could enrich the girl's development. "Please sit down," said Matthew, indicating the comfortable armchair near his desk. "I'd like to discuss something with you." There was a formality in his tone that left Sarah apprehensive. "Is there a problem with my work?" she asked directly. "On the contrary," Matthew replied, pouring himself a finger of whiskey. "Emma is flourishing under your care. It's about another matter." He paused, as if carefully choosing his words. I received a proposal to expand the business to the West Coast. It would be $1 million contract, but it would require my presence in Seattle for at least 2 weeks. I understand, said Sarah, still not comprehending why he seemed so hesitant. That's great for your company, isn't it? Yes, but Matthew set the glass on the desk and looked directly at Sarah. It means I would need to take Emma with me, or leave her here with my mother, which wouldn't be ideal, considering how Patricia views Emma's condition. Sarah nodded, understanding the concern. Patricia Taylor, despite loving her granddaughter, had never made a real effort to learn ASL, preferring to treat Emma's deafness as a temporary problem that would eventually be cured by some medical miracle. So you'll take Emma to Seattle? Asked Sarah, feeling a pang of sadness at the thought of going weeks without seeing the little girl. Actually, said Matthew, leaning slightly forward, I'd like you to accompany us. Sarah blinked, certain she had misunderstood. As your employee? As Emma's companion, yes, Matthew confirmed. All expenses paid, obviously, plus additional compensation. For the displacement, I know you have evening classes, but you could attend online for 2 weeks, couldn't you? The proposal was tempting and frightening at the same time. 2 weeks away from New York, staying in luxury hotels, getting to know a new city with Matthew and Emma. Would that be appropriate? Sarah asked hesitantly. I mean, people might misinterpret. What people? Asked Matthew, with a touch of irritation in his voice. Since when do you care what others think, Sarah? I don't care, she replied firmly, but you should. You have a reputation to maintain, a company to manage. Matthew rose abruptly, walking to the window that offered a panoramic view of the illuminated garden. Do you know what the biggest mistake I made after Jennifer died was? Allowing others' expectations to dictate how I should live my grief, how I should raise my daughter. He turned to face Sarah, his eyes intense in the half-light of the office. I'm not going to make that mistake. Again, Emma needs you, and to be completely honest, so do I. Sarah's heart accelerated with those words. There was something more in that declaration than simply the professional need for her services, and they both knew it. I need to think, she finally said. Matthew nodded, respecting her hesitation. Of course, but don't take too long. We need to leave in 5 days. When Sarah left the mansion that night, her mind was a whirlwind of contradictory thoughts. The professional opportunity was undeniable. Accompanying Emma full-time would be a valuable case study for her special education training. But there was also the Matthew Taylor factor, the man whose presence increasingly awakened feelings that Sarah struggled to keep under control. The next day, when Sarah returned to the mansion, she found a tense atmosphere. Emma was unusually quiet, and Martha, the housekeeper, informed her in a low voice that Matthew and his mother had been having a heated conversation in the office for more than an hour. Sarah tried to distract Emma with artistic activities, but the girl was clearly disturbed, casting anxious glances in the direction of the corridor that led to her father's office. Everything is fine, Sarah signed reassuringly. Your father and your grandmother are just talking. They're fighting because of you, Emma replied surprisingly. Grandma said you shouldn't go with us to Seattle. Sarah felt her face heat up. Of course, Patricia would be against her presence on the trip. The matriarch of the Taylor family had made it clear from the beginning that she considered the growing proximity between Sarah, Matthew, and Emma inappropriate. Before she could respond, the office door opened and Patricia Taylor hurriedly left, her normally composed face contorted in an expression of contained fury. She cast an icy look at Sarah before leaving the house without saying a word. Minutes later, Matthew appeared, looking exhausted. Seeing Emma and Sarah in the living room, he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Daddy, why was Grandma angry? Emma signed. Matthew hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Adult matters, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about. Emma didn't seem convinced, but didn't insist. After the girl was distracted with her drawing notebook, Matthew gestured for Sarah to follow him to the veranda. "I suppose you already imagine the reason for my mother's visit," he said, as soon as they were alone. "She doesn't approve of me going to Seattle." "With you," Sarah replied. Matthew let out a humorless laugh. "That's an understatement. She threatened to cut ties with me if I continue with this madness," as she put it. Sarah felt a weight in her stomach. "Matthew, I don't want to cause problems between you and your family." "You're not causing any problem," he replied firmly. "My mother is living in the last century with outdated ideas about social classes and appearances." Sarah bit her lip, hesitant. "But she's your mother, and Emma's, a grandmother. And because of that, she has the right to dictate how I live my life, who I allow to be part of it." Matthew ran his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration that Sarah now knew well. "Patricia never accepted my choices. Not even Jennifer, with all her pedigree and European education, was considered good enough." He looked directly at Sarah, his voice softening. "I'm not going to let her drive you away from us. Emma needs you. He stopped, as if he had said too much. "You what?" asked Sarah softly. Matthew looked away, fixing it on the city's horizon. "Nothing. Forget it." A heavy silence fell between them, full of unspoken words and repressed feelings. "I'll go," Sarah finally said. Matthew turned to face her. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she replied with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "For Emma." And although she didn't say it aloud, they both knew there were more reasons beyond the girl's well-being. 5 days later, Sarah found herself aboard the Taylor's private jet, flying across America to Seattle. Emma was enchanted with her first plane trip, pressing her face against the window to observe the clouds below them. Matthew, seated across from Sarah, observed the two with an expression that mixed contentment and something deeper, something that made Sarah's heart race whenever their gazes crossed. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, when Emma was distracted with her tablet. "It wasn't just for Emma," Sarah replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Matthew's eyes shone with an intensity that made Sarah blush and look away. "Have you ever wondered what it would be like to follow your heart, even when all the voices around you say it's crazy? How far would you go for someone who brought light to your life in unexpected ways?" The Pacific View Resort in Bellevue, one of the most exclusive areas near Seattle, was an oasis of luxury overlooking Puget Sound. From the balcony of the presidential suite, Sarah could see the golden expanse of the beach, with the turquoise-blue sea magnificently contrasting with the clear sky of the American Northwest. "It's too beautiful," she murmured to herself, still hardly believing she was there. Matthew had reserved 3 connected suites, one for himself, another for Emma, and the third for Sarah. Despite her protest that she didn't need so much luxury, he had insisted that while working for him, she would receive the same treatment as the family. Family. The word echoed in Sarah's mind with a disturbing frequency in recent days, because somehow inexplicably she had begun to feel part of the small Taylor family, and that both frightened and moved her in equal measure. A light knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "May I come in?" asked Matthew, politely remaining in the corridor. "Of course," Sarah replied, moving away from the balcony. Matthew entered wearing casual clothes that made him look younger and more relaxed than his usual impeccable suit. "I came to check if everything is in order." "Everything is perfect," Sarah replied sincerely. "Too perfect for a simple teacher." Matthew frowned. "You need to stop belittling yourself, Sarah. There's nothing simple about you." The unexpected compliment made Sarah's heart race. To disguise her embarrassment, she asked, "And Emma, has she calmed down?" "Finally fell asleep," Matthew replied with a smile. "The excitement of the trip left her electric. She's anxious to explore the beach tomorrow." "We need to buy sunscreen," Sarah commented. "Her skin is very fair." Matthew observed her with a soft expression. You always think of everything. It's my job, she replied automatically. It's more than that, and you know it, said Matthew, taking a step in her direction. What you do for Emma, for us, goes far beyond professional obligations. Sarah felt her throat tighten. There was an intensity in Matthew's gaze that made it difficult to maintain the professional composure she tried so hard to preserve. I have an early meeting tomorrow, he continued, changing the subject to Sarah's relief. Would you mind taking Emma to the beach alone? I promise to join you after lunch. Of course not, Sarah replied. It would be my pleasure. Matthew smiled, that rare and genuine smile that completely transformed his face. Thank you. Good night, Sarah. Good night, Matthew. The next morning dawned radiant. After breakfast, Sarah and Emma headed to the resort's private beach. The girl was enchanted with everything. The texture of the sand between her fingers, the swaying of the palm trees, the waves gently breaking on the natural reef barrier. Sarah taught Emma special signs related to the sea and the beach, creating a unique vocabulary that made the girl smile with joy. Together, they built elaborate sandcastles and collected colorful seashells. Look, Sarah! Emma signed excitedly, showing a tiny starfish she had found in the damp sand. It's beautiful, Sarah replied, in ASL. But we need to return it to the sea, so it can live. Carefully, they walked to the water's edge and gently placed the small starfish in the gentle waves. Emma watched, fascinated, as the marine creature disappeared into the crystal-clear waters. We did a good deed, the girl signed proudly. Yes, we did, agreed Sarah, impressed by the little one's sensitivity. They were so absorbed in their silent conversation that they didn't notice Matthew's approach until he was just a few steps away. Looks like you two are having fun, he commented, smiling at seeing his daughter's tanned, happy face. Daddy! Emma ran to hug him, her small hands quickly telling him about the starfish they had saved. Matthew looked at Sarah over his daughter's head, his eyes conveying a silent gratitude that words couldn't express. The rest of the day passed in perfect harmony. The three had lunch at a seaside restaurant, then visited the colourful historic district of Pike Place Market, with its cobblestone streets and charming shops. Sarah served as an interpreter for Emma, translating the tour guide's explanations about the rich history of the city. At the Olympic Sculpture Park, Emma was especially fascinated by the organic forms and textures of the artworks displayed outdoors. She has an artist's eyes, Matthew commented, observing his daughter carefully examining the details of a sculpture. Like her mother? Sarah asked softly. Matthew nodded, a shadow of sadness quickly passing over his face. Jennifer was a photographer. She captured beauty where others didn't even think to look. Is that why you keep that old camera in your office? You noticed, said Matthew, surprised. Yes, it was hers. I couldn't part with it, even though it hasn't been used since... Sarah gently touched his arm. Emma should know that part of her mother. Art could be a connection between them. Matthew considered the suggestion in silence, watching his daughter, who was now animatedly drawing in her little notebook, trying to reproduce one of the sculptures. You're right, he finally said. I've kept so many of Jennifer's things, afraid that the memories would be too painful. But I'm depriving Emma of knowing who her mother really was. The sun was beginning to set when they returned to the hotel. Emma was exhausted but radiant, falling asleep almost immediately after her bath. Sarah tucked her into bed and was adjusting the covers when she felt Matthew's presence at the door. She had quite a day, he commented quietly. It was wonderful, Sarah agreed, following him out of the room. Would you like to have dinner with me on the terrace? Matthew unexpectedly invited. The resort's chef has prepared something special, and we have a baby monitor to keep track of Emma. Sarah hesitated. Dining alone with Matthew seemed to cross the invisible line she strived to maintain between the professional and the personal. Sensing her hesitation, Matthew added, just to discuss Emma's progress and plan the rest of the week, nothing more. Of course, Sarah replied, ignoring the slight disappointment she felt at that clarification. I'll just change clothes. Half an hour later, she met Matthew on the private terrace of the presidential suite. The table was beautifully set, with candles and tropical flowers. The night view of Seattle, with its twinkling lights reflected in the sound, was breathtaking. "This doesn't exactly look like a work meeting," Sarah commented, indicating the romantic atmosphere. Matthew smiled, a little embarrassed. "Maybe I went a bit overboard with the instructions to the concierge." The dinner was delicious. Typical Pacific Northwest cuisine, reinterpreted with a sophisticated touch. The conversation flowed naturally, starting with Emma and her development, but soon drifting to more personal topics. Sarah told about her simple childhood in upstate New York, her determination to study despite financial difficulties, and how her deaf cousin had inspired her to pursue a career in special education. Matthew talked about the pressure of growing up as the heir to the Taylor business empire, his rebelliousness in youth, and how he had met Jennifer during a business trip to Paris. She was photographing the Seine at dawn, he recalled with a nostalgic smile. I was running, stressed about an important meeting. We literally bumped into each other, and her camera fell into the water. "Oh, no!" exclaimed Sarah. "Yes, it was terrible. I felt so guilty that I insisted on buying her another one that same day. We ended up spending the entire afternoon together, visiting photography shops. Before I knew it, I had missed the meeting and didn't even care anymore." Sarah smiled, touched by the story. "Love at first sight?" "Something like that," Matthew replied, his eyes lost in memories. "Jennifer taught me to see beauty in the details, to stop and observe the world instead of just passing through it." "She sounds like she was an amazing woman," Sarah said sincerely. "She was," Matthew agreed, "and she would have loved you, the way you connect with Emma, how you encourage her to express herself. Jennifer always wanted our daughter to have a voice, even if she couldn't hear." Sarah's heart tightened at these words. There was genuine pain in Matthew's voice, but also an acceptance that wasn't present when they first met. "You don't blame yourself as much anymore," she observed. Matthew looked at her, surprised. "How do you know I blame myself?" "It's written in every interaction you have with Emma," Sarah replied softly. "The overprotection, the constant fear, the way you always seem to be compensating for something." Matthew took a deep breath, serving more wine for both of them. "The accident, it happened on one of my planes, a routine flight to check a new tourist route. I should have been there, but I cancelled at the last minute because of a business meeting." "Matthew, you couldn't have known." "Exactly, I wasn't there. Jennifer went alone and the rest is history." He took a sip of wine. "The worst part is that Emma wanted to go too. Jennifer didn't allow it because she thought she was too young for the trip. If she had let her, then you would have lost them both," Sarah completed firmly. "You can't think like that." Matthew looked at her, his eyes shining with contained emotion. "How do you do that?" "What?" "See through me. Say exactly what I need to hear." Sarah looked away, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. "It's just common sense." "No, it's you," insisted Matthew, leaning over the table. "Sarah, since you came into our lives, everything has changed. Emma is flourishing, and He hesitated. "I'm learning to live again, not just exist." He stretched out his arm, lightly touching Sarah's hand on the table. The contact, though subtle, sent waves of warmth through her body. "I'm afraid I'm crossing boundaries," Matthew admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "You work for me, and I know that complicates everything, but I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is just gratitude or professional admiration." Sarah felt her heart race. Part of her wanted to withdraw her hand, maintain the safe distance she had established. Another part, stronger, more insistent, wanted to turn her palm up and intertwine her fingers with his. "Matthew, At that moment, the baby monitor emitted a sound. Emma was calling. The spell broke instantly. Sarah withdrew her hand and stood up. "I need to see what she wants." Matthew nodded, a mixture of disappointment and understanding on his face. Of course. Sarah found Emma sitting in bed, eyes wide in the dark. The girl had had a nightmare and was sighing agitatedly about giant waves and not being able to breathe. "It was just a bad dream," Sarah signed reassuringly, sitting beside the girl and hugging her. "You're safe. I'm here. Your father is here." Gradually, Emma calmed down in Sarah's arms, her breathing becoming more regular. "Will you stay with me and Daddy forever?" Emma signed sleepily. The innocent question hit Sarah like lightning. What could she answer? That she was just a temporary employee? That the feelings that were beginning to blossom between her and Matthew were too complicated to promise anything? "I'm here now," she finally answered, the most honest response she could offer. When Emma finally fell asleep again, Sarah returned to the terrace to find Matthew. Contemplating the ocean, the dinner already cleared away. "Is she okay?" he asked. "Yes, just a nightmare," Sarah replied. "She's back asleep." Matthew nodded without turning around. "Sarah, about what I said before. We don't need to talk about it now," she interrupted gently. He turned then, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. "I need you to know, I'm not confusing gratitude with other feelings. What's happening between us, and I believe you feel it too, is real." Sarah took a deep breath, gathering courage. "Yes, it's real, and scary and complicated, and potentially disastrous. Or it could be the most right thing that's ever happened to us," Matthew retorted, taking a step in her direction. They were close now, so close that Sarah could feel the heat emanating from his body, inhale his subtle cologne. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The sound of the waves, the city lights, everything disappeared, and there were only the two of them, suspended in that moment of infinite possibilities. "Emma asked me if I would stay with you both forever," whispered Sarah. Matthew smiled, a smile full of tenderness. "And what did you answer?" "That I'm here now," she admitted. "It's the only promise I can make." "It's enough," he replied, slowly leaning in, giving her every opportunity to back away. But Sarah didn't back away. When their lips finally met, it was as if something inside her that had been dormant for a long time finally awakened. The kiss was gentle, hesitant at first, then deeper, charged with long repressed feelings. When they separated, both were breathless, as if they had run a long distance. "This complicates everything," Sarah murmured, resting her forehead on his chest. Matthew wrapped her in his arms, his chin resting on her head. "Or it simplifies everything," he murmured. "Depends on how we look at it." The days in Seattle passed quickly, wrapped in an almost magical atmosphere. During the day, Matthew dedicated a few hours to business meetings, while Sarah and Emma explored the beauties of the city, the Museum of Pop Culture with its incredible collection, the colorful Pike Place Market, the catamaran trips on Puget Sound. At night, when Emma fell asleep, Sarah and Matthew shared moments of growing intimacy, deep conversations on the veranda, hand-in-hand walks on the deserted beach, kisses that became increasingly difficult to interrupt. It was like living in an alternate reality, away from the complications of New York, from expectations and judgments. But they both knew that this bubble of perfection would soon burst, and they would have to face the real world. On the eve of their return, Sarah was watching the sunset from the veranda when she felt Matthew approach from behind, wrapping her in an embrace. "A penny for your thoughts," he murmured against her hair. "I'm thinking about tomorrow," Sarah answered honestly. "About how it will be when we return." Matthew gently turned her to face him. "What do you want to happen when we return?" Sarah hesitated. This was the question she had been avoiding throughout the week. "I don't know, Matthew. All of this feels like a dream here, but in New York, there are so many complications." "What complications?" "My mother. Not just her. There's your work, my position as an employee, what people will say. And especially, there's Emma. Matthew frowned. What about Emma? She adores you. Exactly, Sarah replied. I've become important to her. And if this thing between us doesn't work out, have you thought about the impact that would have? She's already lost her mother, Matthew. A heavy silence fell between them. Sarah could see that her words had hit the mark. It was a fear that Matthew probably carried as well, but hadn't verbalized. So you want us to go back to what we were before? Employer and employee? Pretend that nothing happened? He asked, a tone of hurt evident in his voice. No, Sarah quickly replied. I just think we need to take it slow, be discreet, think about all the implications before we tell the world, Matthew completed. I understand your concerns, Sarah. They're valid and show how much you care about Emma. He held her hands. But I need you to know something. What I feel for you isn't a whim or a passing passion. I'm in love with you, with your heart, your strength, the way you've illuminated our lives. The words hit Sarah like a wave, leaving her breathless. Matthew, you don't need to say anything now, he gently interrupted. Just think about this. Perhaps the greatest proof of love we can give Emma is to show her that it's possible to find happiness again, that life goes on, that the heart can heal and love once more. He kissed her forehead and moved away, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and with the rapidly darkening sky over the ocean. The return trip to New York was quiet. Emma slept most of the flight, exhausted from the week's adventures. Sarah remained, absorbed in a book she could barely read, aware of Matthew's occasional glance. When the jet landed at LaGuardia Airport, reality greeted them in the form of Patricia Taylor, waiting in the private terminal with a rigid expression. I didn't expect to see you here, Mother, Matthew commented, clearly surprised. Evidently, Patricia replied dryly, kissing her son on the cheek before turning to her granddaughter. Emma, darling, I missed you so much. The transformation in her expression when addressing the girl was remarkable. Emma hugged her grandmother politely, but her eyes sought Sarah, signing animatedly about the trip. Patricia observed the interaction with an expression difficult to read. Miss Johnson, she finally said, addressing Sarah with cold politeness. I hope the trip was educational. Sarah felt her face flush, but maintained her composure. It was very enriching, Mrs. Taylor. Emma learned a lot. Patricia's gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment longer than necessary, as if trying to decipher something. Then she turned back to her son. Matthew, we need to talk about the Westbrook contract. Your father would have never approved the terms you're offering. My father is no longer running the company, Mother, Matthew replied, a subtle edge in his voice, and this isn't the time or place for that discussion. An uncomfortable tension hung in the air, broken only when Emma tugged at her father's sleeve, signing that she was hungry. Let's stop for a dinner on the way home, Matthew decided, clearly relieved for the excuse to end the awkward encounter. Would you like to join us, Mother? I think not, Patricia replied, her gaze moving meaningfully between Matthew and Sarah. I have other commitments this evening, but I expect to see you at the family dinner on Sunday, Matthew, with Emma, of course. The emphasis on Emma's name, with the deliberate exclusion of Sarah, was not lost on anyone. After Patricia's departure, the atmosphere noticeably lightened. They stopped at a charming Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village, where Emma delighted in a plate of spaghetti, while Matthew and Sarah shared a comfortable silence, their hands occasionally touching under the table. It was nearly 10 when they finally reached the Taylor mansion. Emma was half asleep, her head resting on Sarah's shoulder as they entered the grand foyer. I should put her to bed, Sarah said softly, already heading toward the staircase. I'll help you, Matthew offered, following them up. Together they completed the bedtime ritual. Sarah helped Emma change into pajamas, while Matthew turned down the covers and arranged her favorite stuffed animals. The domestic intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. It felt right, natural, as if they had been doing this together for years rather than days. When Emma was finally tucked in, her eyes heavy with sleep, she signed drowsily, "I wish we could stay in Seattle forever. The three of us." Sarah and Matthew exchanged a glance over the girl's head, a world of unspoken feelings in that single look. "Sleep well, princess," Matthew signed to his daughter, kissing her forehead. "Sweet dreams," added Sarah, adjusting the nightlight. As they quietly closed Emma's door, the reality of their situation seemed to settle back upon them. The magical bubble of Seattle had definitely burst. They were back in New York, with all its complications and expectations. "Would you like a cup of tea?" "Before you go?" Matthew asked, breaking the silence as they descended the stairs. Sarah hesitated, knowing that accepting meant prolonging the moment when they would have to address the elephant in the room. "Actually, I think I should get home. It's been a long day and I have class tomorrow morning." Disappointment flashed briefly across Matthew's face, but he nodded in understanding. "Of course. I'll have Thomas drive you." The drive to Sarah's modest apartment in Queens was silent, laden, with all the things left unsaid. When the car pulled up in front of her building, Matthew surprised her by getting out to walk her to the door. "You didn't have to come up," she said, fumbling for her keys. "I wanted to," he replied simply. Then, taking a deep breath, "Sarah, I meant what I said in Seattle, about my feelings for you." Sarah looked up at him, her heart racing. "I know you did, and I feel the same way." Relief and joy washed over Matthew's face. He stepped closer, one hand gently cupping her cheek. "Then why do I feel like you're slipping away?" "Because I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of my feelings, but of everything else. Your mother, your social circle, the company. I don't belong in that world, Matthew." "You belong with us," he replied firmly. "With Emma, with me. The rest is just details." Sarah smiled sadly. "Those details have a way of becoming very important in the real world." Matthew looked at her for a long moment, then leaned in and kissed her, a kiss so tender and full of promise that it brought tears to her eyes. "Tomorrow," he said as they finally parted, "come to dinner, just the three of us. We'll talk more then." Sarah nodded, unable to find her voice. She watched as he returned to the car, waving once before disappearing into the New York night. Inside her apartment, Sarah leaned against the closed door, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had never expected this turn of events when she first met the silent little girl in that luxurious office. Now, just months later, both Emma and Matthew had become essential parts of her life in ways she could never have imagined. The next morning dawned grey and rainy, matching Sarah's conflicted mood. She went through her morning classes mechanically, her thoughts constantly drifting to the tailors and the decision that loomed ahead of her. By the time she arrived at the mansion that afternoon, she had made up her mind. She would be honest with Matthew about her feelings, but also about her fears and reservations. They would need to proceed carefully, for Emma's sake if nothing else. But when she entered the house, she was met with an unexpected sight. Emma and Matthew in the kitchen, covered in flour, attempting to make what appeared to be cookies. The counters were a disaster, and the air was filled with the distinct smell of something burning. "What on earth?" Sarah exclaimed, unable to suppress a laugh. Matthew looked up, his face breaking into a relieved smile. "Thank God you're here. We might need to be rescued." "Wanted to surprise you," Emma signed, her small face serious despite the flour dusting her nose. "Daddy said we should make cookies, but he doesn't know how." "I can see that," Sarah replied, setting down her bag and rolling up her sleeves. "Let me help." What followed was an afternoon of laughter and shared joy as Sarah guided them through the proper cookie-making process. Matthew proved to be surprisingly adept once given proper instruction. and Emma beamed with pride when the first batch emerged golden and perfect from the oven. Watching them together, father and daughter, their matching green eyes bright with happiness, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The fears and doubts that had plagued her since their return from Seattle seemed to recede in the face of this simple domestic joy. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, Matthew found Sarah on the terrace, gazing at the lights of the distant city. Without a word, he handed her a glass of wine and stood beside her, their shoulders just touching. "Thank you for today," he said after a comfortable silence, "for saving our disastrous baking attempt, for making Emma laugh like that." Sarah turned to face him. "I need to tell you something, Matthew." "That sounds serious," he replied, though his expression remained calm. "I'm in love with you," Sarah said simply, "and I'm terrified of what that means. For me, for you, for Emma, for all our lives." Matthew sat down his wine glass and took her hands in his. "Being scared is normal. This is a big change for all of us. But Sarah, some things are worth being brave for." "Your mother will never accept me," Sarah said, giving voice to one of her biggest fears. "My mother will have to learn to respect my choices," he replied firmly, "just as she eventually did with Jennifer." "And Emma?" Matthew smiled softly. "Emma already loves you, possibly more than she loves me some days." Sarah laughed at that, feeling some of the tension leave her body. "I don't want to rush into anything. For Emma's sake, we should take this slowly. Let her adjust to the idea gradually." "I agree," Matthew said, pulling her gently into his arms. "We have all the time in the world." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, with the New York skyline glittering in the distance, Sarah realized that sometimes the greatest risks led to the most beautiful rewards. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Matthew and Emma by her side, it would certainly be worth every step. 3 months later, Sarah stood nervously in the elegant foyer of the Taylor mansion, now officially her home. Today was the day of Patricia Taylor's annual charity gala, and for the first time, Sarah would be attending not as Emma's companion, but as Matthew's partner. "You look beautiful," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to find Matthew watching her, his eyes filled with love and pride. She smoothed down the front of her midnight sea blue gown, a designer piece that still felt foreign on her body. "I feel like an imposter," she admitted. "Like everyone will take one look at me and know I don't belong." Matthew crossed the room to stand before her, taking her hands in his. "You belong exactly where you are. With me, with Emma, the rest of them will just have to adjust their antiquated perspectives." As if on cue, Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, a vision in her pale pink dress. She had insisted on having her hair styled just like Sarah's, and the similarity made Sarah's heart swell with emotion. "Beautiful!" Emma sighed enthusiastically when she saw Sarah. "Like a princess." "You're the princess tonight," Sarah signed back with a smile. The doorbell rang, and Martha appeared to announce that the limousine was waiting. Matthew took a deep breath, then looked at the two most important people in his life. "Ready?" he asked them both. Sarah exchanged a look with Emma, who gave her an encouraging thumbs up. "As ready as we'll ever be," she replied with a smile. As they stepped out into the crisp autumn evening, Sarah felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Just over a year ago, she had been cleaning offices at night, struggling to make ends meet, dreaming of someday finishing her degree. Now, she was walking hand in hand with the man she loved, his daughter, soon to be legally hers through adoption, skipping ahead of them. Life had a way of taking unexpected turns, of bringing people together through the most unlikely circumstances: a deaf child's frustration, a janitor's compassion, a widower's grief, separate threads that somehow wove together to create something beautiful and strong. At the gala, Patricia Taylor watched from across the ballroom as her son danced with the former janitor, their faces alight with happiness. Beside her, Emma was teaching her young cousin how to sign simple words, her confidence and joy radiating to everyone around her, with a sigh of resignation that held just a hint of grudging approval. Patricia raised her champagne glass in a silent toast. Perhaps some traditions were meant to be broken. Perhaps some boundaries existed only to be crossed by those brave enough to follow their hearts. And in the center of the dance floor, oblivious to the curious glances and whispered comments, Sarah and Matthew moved in perfect harmony, two souls who had found in each other not just love, but home.